Kia kaha, kia toa, kia mana wanui. Ko te atua, tō tātou piringa, tō tātou kaha. Kia kaha, kia toa, kia mana wanui.
Before the 17th century, New Zealand was predominantly inhabited by the Māori and other tribes of people originating from Polynesia and Southeast Asia. The Dutch explorer Abel Tasman first discovered the primitive island nation in 1642 and met great resistance from the Māori. Not until the mid-18th century did voyagers from Great Britain, beginning with James Cook, start to migrate more heavily to the islands and establish settlements for future immigrants. The European influx to the population of New Zealand resulted in detrimental changes to the everyday lifestyles of the natives. When gold was found in the mid-1800s, thousands of Europeans flocked to the islands seeking their fortunes. Over the years, advanced technology and foreign products were introduced to the natives such as pigs, potatoes, and muskets. The arrival of European settlers in New Zealand ultimately led to the cultural decline of the native peoples.
The Māori people initially migrated from Polynesia on rafts around the 14th century. They first reached the northern island and slowly migrated south along the coasts. However, due to the colder climates farther south, the majority stayed up north. In 1642, the Dutch were the first to discover New Zealand. Abel Tasman discovered the island, eager for possible trade opportunities. However, Tasman's first contact with the Māori natives ended in violence.
Another famous explorer to embark upon New Zealand was the Englishman James Cook. Cook made a total of 3 voyages to the islands. His first voyage, in October of 1769, he sailed his ship the Endeavour to the northern island. There, he discovered the Māori people, and after a series of unfortunate events, Cook and his men got into disagreements which led to battles. These skirmishes ultimately resulted in the death of many Māori people. After the battles were over, Cook sailed to the South Island and never saw the Māori again. In his second voyage in 1773, Cook charted the Dusky Sound located in the southern part of the South Island. Finally, in his third voyage in 1777, Cook explored the Queen Charlotte Sound but only stayed for 2 weeks.
The Musket Wars were a series of as many as 3,000 battles and raids fought throughout New Zealand, as well as the Chatham Islands, among the Māori between 1807 and 1845, after the Māori first obtained muskets and then engaged in an intertribal arms race in order to gain territory or seek revenge for past defeats. The battles resulted in the loss of between 20,000 and 40,000 lives, and the enslavement of tens of thousands of the Māori people, and significantly altered the Rohi or tribal territorial boundaries before the imposition of colonial government in the 1840s. The wars are seen as an example of the fatal impact of indigenous contact with the European people.
In the mid-1970s, leader of the Māori Land March, Winnie Cooper, explains her beliefs of unity of the people of New Zealand as a whole. She states ideas of racial and cultural equality that would later be used by Nelson Mandela in motivating the people of South Africa after the apartheid. Her ideas demonstrate the suppression of native Māori rights and freedoms by the settlers from Europe.
Now you can't fight the Pākehā. The quickest way getting rid of this Pākehā, marry them. Let all our young girls, our boys, everybody, try to go to the dances and try and marry the whole lot.
Fina's message of unity eventually reached a national audience in a series of 1990 commercials.
God in our hearts. United we stand for the future of our land. Hush all murmurs and discontent.
Historian Michael King suggested the term Holocaust could be applied to the Musket War period. Another historian, Angela Ballara, has questioned the validity of the term Musket Wars, suggesting the conflict was no more than a continuation of Māori custom, but more destructive because of the widespread use of firearms. The Musket Wars were a series of battles numbering nearly 3,000 total encounters. Between 1807 and 1845, the Maori lost nearly one-fifth of their total population due to the conflicts created by the introduction of muskets to their society. While approximately 20,000 were left dead, tens of thousands were imprisoned and enslaved. The wars are seen as an example of the detrimental impact of the contact between the Europeans with the indigenous people.
Historian Claudia Orange states the Treaty of Waitangi, New Zealand's founding document, was meant to be a partnership between the Māori and the British Crown. Although intended to create unity, different understandings of the treaty and breaches of it have caused conflict. The Treaty of Waitangi was a written agreement between the British Crown and several hundred Māori chiefs. This treaty officially made New Zealand a British colony, as well as making the Māori British subjects. Due to the language barrier, Britain was able to take advantage of the translations within the treaty. The first article stated that the Māori would give Queen Victoria governance over the land, while the English translation gave the Queen sovereignty. The second article dealt with the British Crown having the absolute right to deal with the Māori over buying land and its products. The third article gave Māori the Queen's protection and established the rights of the British subjects. The issue with this treaty was that it was pursued in order to end earlier conflicts and fighting between the British and natives. However, due to the British buying extensive amounts of land and eventually pushing into the Māori's domain, the Māori began to distrust the British government and would later lead to the New Zealand Wars.
There were many problems that arose from interactions between the Māori and the European settlers. There was a chief and priest from Tahiti named Tupaia, whom the crew picked up on the way to New Zealand. Tupaia spoke both English and the native Tahitian language that was very similar to the language spoken by the Māori. Even though Tupaia was able to translate many exchanges between the Europeans and the Māori, misunderstandings arose. Most issues were over trade, but the Māori became infuriated at the crew when they inadvertently broke sacred restrictions the Māori had placed on certain areas.
Historian Keith Sinclair argues that some of the first Europeans to discover New Zealand established peaceful relations with the Māori. He says they would have had to do so for the purpose of trading with the Māori as well as other tribes. Many of the white settlers, or Pākehā, intermarried with the Māori tribes and became Pākehā Māori. They lived with the Māori and adopted their customs. When Europeans landed at New Zealand, the Māori immediately began trading produce, water, and manual labor for various goods. This trade was beneficial to both peoples. Many tribes in the north traded food and protection for European muskets. The Māori also began to adopt Christianity from missionaries who converted them and taught about Christian teachings. This was evident in the Māori's interest in eternal life, their interest in changing their religious ways, and their newfound awareness to the detrimental effects of war.
Ultimately, from the rise of the European population in New Zealand, stemmed the rapid decline of Māori customs. Foreign settlements brought with them new diseases and technology that permanently changed warfare on the island nation, and leading to thousands more dead natives in the intertribal warfare waged during the mid-1800s. The higher-educated British tricked the Māori people into signing many detrimental treaties, handing over significant power and control to the Crown, such as the Treaty of Waitangi, in which the nation was given to Britain in exchange for protection.
The colonization and modernization of New Zealand disrupted the common way of life for the native Māori people. Such an invasion of culture parallels the manner in which the early American colonists disregarded the Native Americans, and the European settlers of South Africa mistreated the Africans they encountered. Although the native peoples in each of these situations saw much technological advancement to their everyday lives, the foreign invaders clearly disregarded the preservation of native culture and traditional way of life.
Kia kaha.